Good morning. We've put together a short presentation. There are four of us presenting on this subject. We'll start off with Rob Corr, who is right now going through transitioning from an insurance practice to a fee-for-service practice. Fred Tsutsui, who has been in practice a long time, will speak on those issues. I originally had a different subject until I put a letter into the chat room and asked people to tell me what they'd like us to speak on. So I'm going to be speaking on perception versus reality, what's going on down in the trenches out in the real world. And then finally, Mitch will talk on the future of endodontics. And I think you should glean some useful information from this. I think I'll leave it to each guy just to introduce himself. Other than let me say that I am probably the eldest statesman in TDO, having graduated in 1969. And I'll just show a brief bio of mine when I start, because I think I have a unique perspective that some others may not have. And each one of the four of us comes from a different perspective. So I'll call on Rob to kick us off.
Yep, straight down. Thank you. All right, how do I advance? Okay, all right, thanks, I'm good. All right, as it turns out, I have a paralyzing fear of public speaking, so I apologize if I seem a little bit shaky, and it's really quite intimidating. I love endodontics. I really enjoy what we do. When I'm not performing root canals, I find myself thinking about it and talking about it, and I spend a lot of time on TDO chat, and in this room represents people I respect most professionally, and to have all those eyes fixed on me right now is a little bit intimidating, so hopefully I'll have something to share. Russ asked me to give a little bio about myself, which I think really is pretty relevant, so that you can see where I'm coming from and see if there's any commonalities, see if there's anything you can relate to. I graduated Arizona State University in '99, BS in psychology, and I think actually having a background in psychology was very fortunate, and I think it set me up for a lot of things in dentistry. Loma Linda University for my dental degree. I did a one-year AGD in the Army and then 2 years of general practice, and I had the privilege of working with Special Forces group there, which was incredibly rewarding. I went back to Loma Linda University for my residency, and from 2009 until now I've been in private practice. I'm going to skip over a couple of things just out of the limitation of time. I opened practice from scratch. It's a very, very intimidating time in my life, and I'm finally getting past that overwhelming fear that I've had the past few years. At the end of the first year, I had a full-time endodontist join me, and he's here today, as well as Ryan Jack. He's fantastic. At the end of year 2, I had a part-time moonlighter that joined us, is still with us. And when we started out, I was full PPO, so I was completely an insurance-based practice. And we're in the process of transitioning out of that and leading towards a fee-for-service practice. At the end of the year 3 now, we're very busy, even with the 2 additional endodontists, and we're in a decision process right now. So my intent isn't to stand up here and try to make any recommendations, because I don't think I'm an expert, and I don't know if my experiences will relate to what you're doing in your own practice, but I'm just going to share my story, and hopefully that as we go through the decisions that I faced and how we got through those, that there might be something for you, and to explain the decision process and the concerns that I have in my practice now. When I graduated dental school, I had $150,000 in academic debt, and anybody that's a recent graduate or a resident right now is probably looking at that, and that's a pretty modest amount of debt. There was a classmate of mine that graduated year 2 after me. He had $750,000 in academic debt, so $150,000 is pretty low. I had some financial support from the military, so I spent 3 years in the Army, which offset a lot of those costs, but that's my starting point. Close to $500,000 setting up a practice the way that I wanted it, with the microscopes and the cone beam, and it's an expensive endeavor. And at the same time as I'm doing that, I'm starting my life, starting a family. I want to buy a home. I want to start establishing myself. So when I started my practice, I had over $1 million in debt. That's a scary thing. That's really lots of lost nights of sleep. So when you have this heavy debt, and I had a very uncertain future, I didn't know if I was going to be successful. I didn't know what was going to happen. I decided to start off in insurances, and my plan was, and having been TDO post-grad following chat before I started the practice, my intent was to start a practice just the way that Gary had intended, without any insurances, and just start as fee-for-service. But the fear of failure really set in, and I took some insurances, and I don't think it was all bad. I would recommend anyone starting out that has the ability to start out fee-for-service to do that. But my first day of practice, I had a single patient to treat, and I had $1 million debt to pay. And that's a scary thing. That first patient that came to see me was referred to a different endodontist and found me because I was in network. By the end of the first year, I was starting to book out in excess of 2 weeks. But at this point, most of those patients were insurance patients. I perceive insurance as a form of marketing. If you're in network, patients are going to come seek you out just because you are an in-network provider. But the marketing costs to get those patients could be $400 or more. In fact, one of my providers was $500 per patient just to get that in. When I was starting out and I had enormous gaps in my schedule, it was a good payoff to have that marketing ability with the insurance. But the other thing I think insurance did for me, and the way that I considered it, was as an extension of residency. When I graduated, I felt very well trained coming out of Loma Linda, but I still had a lot of experience to gain. And first impressions are important. So if I go walk on the, knock on the door of the best general dentist in town as a recent grad, I'm not prepared for that yet. I felt that I wasn't quite up to the standard that I should be, communication skills with patients, with the referring offices, and that the office systems just weren't developed yet to get there. And I just needed to get better at my endodontics. This is an example of a case, patient ID number 13. So not my first patient, but pretty close, because I was my first patient, and then everyone has a NITA endo probably when you go through the TDO training. So you have all these experimental patients. So this is my first week, and I still think it's a pretty decent case. But if you look at this case, the radiographs are off angle, my photographs stink, I'm a little overextended, my access is blown out. So that was a case that I was very proud of at the time, but I would not be proud of presenting this case to my top restorative dentists today. So I felt like I wasn't quite ready. We've all heard a cliche like this: dress for the job you want, not the job you have. So what's important is, if you're in the insurance game, that you produce the work that's worthy of what you want to be compensated for, not what you're currently getting. So if you're in the insurance game and you're rushing through cases because you don't feel fairly compensated, you're going to get stuck there. I cannot overemphasize the value of my office team. This is my office staff, and they're fantastic. They're probably the most important asset that I have in my practice. They make the first and the final impressions. Anytime a patient calls, stops in, they see a smile, they hear a smile on the phone. They are my concierge service for the practice. I'd recently hired somebody that was very dependable. I had no doubt that if I asked her to work 150 hours a week, she would. And she was very nice, she was very pleasant, but it just didn't click. She just didn't match the culture of the practice, and it was a very difficult thing to let her go because she was a fantastic employee. But we have a wonderful culture in our practice, and I really credit my staff for doing that. I looked through all my testimonials when I was putting this together, and it's always fun to hear, Dr. Corr was great, it was a painless procedure, but I'm very proud of the fact that almost every testimonial we have in some way emphasizes how pleasant our staff was. I'm not going to go into too much. Obviously, it's speaking to the choir that to become a fee-for-service practice, you have to be very good at what you do. And I think that TDO sets us up for that. If you are engaged in TDO chat, you're constantly trying to keep up with the best in the world. And if you're turning out good endodontics and you have concierge service, you're going to supply a demand. So these are the decision points that I was at. At the end of year one, full PPO practice, almost all my patients were insurance patients, but I was booking out more than 2 weeks. But I wasn't making anywhere near as much as I should to cover the expenses at that time. So I had these 3 choices that I wrestled with. I could start to cut my insurances, I could renegotiate my PPO fees, or I could add a full-time endodontist. And the decision that I came to at that point was I wanted to work with somebody, and that's a personal thing. I think not everybody wants to have another person in their practice, but I did. So we stayed on the PPO game, but I was able to elevate a little bit, probably 3 to 5% on average for my PPO. So if anyone's in insurance and you're staying that way for a while, try to renegotiate things to get them up. But that was the decision that I made at that time, is to bring somebody in, maintain the PPOs, and just renegotiate the fee schedule. So at the end of the year 2, now we have 2 full-time endodontists in my practice, and we got to a point fairly quickly we were starting to book out 2 weeks again. So we were very busy, but we were not very productive. for the amount of time that we want to spend with our patients. And those 3 decisions were presented to me again. And this is where we started to cut our insurances, and this is what set us down the road for transitioning towards a fee-for-service practice. So over the last year, we've gone from a completely PPO to a point where I think I could be almost completely fee-for-service today. I do participate in 3 insurances still, and there's a reason for that. One of them pays our full fee, so there's really no reason for me to get rid of it at this time until my fees are elevated in excess of that. One serves active duty military, which is a low-paying plan, but I continue to do that for personal reasons because of my Army background. And then the last is this very dominant carrier in my town. Most of our dentists take it, and it's just a convenience thing. But my next appointment, if somebody calls today and they need an appointment to see me, I'm booked out 2, 3, maybe even 4 weeks now. So this is the decision that I'm struggling with right now. Is it time? Should I just go complete full fee for service? Is it time to consider adding another endodontist to our mix? And this is where I'm at right now. I think the first question, really, the $1 million question is it right for you? And I started to think about it. There's certain advantages, I think, to having a PPO practice. I wouldn't want it. But for some people, it's a very effortless way to get patients in the door. If you don't like to, or you just don't feel good at talking to people, and you just want patients to come seek you out on their own, insurances will bring them in. One thing that was important to me, when I grew up, I had a very modest background. There's no way that I could afford, as a child, to be a patient in my own practice, and I probably wouldn't have been able to afford to be in anyone's practice here. And I kind of liked the fact that I was accessible to the working class patient. And generally the case spectrum was a little easier. Most of the PPO patients come in or caries exposures, initial treats, and that's kind of fun in some way. And then the referring dentist loyalty is to your insurance plan. So there's a lot of leeway with the insurance or with the referring dentist in that regard. The big advantage, obviously, with fee-for-service that we all deserve is that I'm working less, I'm seeing fewer patients, spending more time with the patient, doing the quality that I want to do, and I'm earning more money in the process. The patients are more reliable. It's been a long time since I've had openings in my schedule. We have patients that cancel, and we do have patients that no-show, but it's very infrequent now, so our patient base is very reliable. And fee-for-service patients come from fee-for-service general practitioners who are just generally better clinicians overall. Patients aren't balking about fees, better follow-up restorative care, which is very important to me. The catch-22 in our practice, though, is that we're starting to transition towards fee-for-service. Our case spectrum is getting more difficult. And the patients occasionally getting more inquisitive or just more demanding. They need more emotional massaging to get through the appointment, so to speak. And that's a good thing or a bad thing depending on who you are and how you appreciate that. I kind of like where we're headed with that. But the question that I was faced with, and I think anyone in my position will probably continue to face with, if becoming fee-for-service means that I'm not going to be accessible to my average working class family, the person that I was when I was growing up, and the case spectrum continues to get harder, is it going to be satisfying for me? And the answer in my life is yes, it is, and so that's why we're moving, but this is the question that I think most of us would struggle with. When you decide the time is right to do it. So if you decide you want to move towards fee-for-service, how do you know when? TDO creates a nice report for insurances. This report breaks down our dental companies, and this would show all of the insurance carriers that paid a claim in our office. But I just pulled out, and I'll call it Omega Dental. I don't know if I can use names, but this is our largest insurance carrier, and so obviously this particular carrier here is our biggest. So these are all the fees in this column right here that we submitted for claims. So that's what I should have been paid if I was getting a paid full fee for this particular time period. And then this column here is what we actually got paid. So looking at that column, we can sum that up, and I can see that I wrote off $34,000 in fees in order to be part of this insurance plan. That's an awfully big marketing expense. It kept me busy, but that's what it cost me to be busy at that time. That's 36.4% of my total production. Now, we take home what we scrape off the top. So that's actually, given an approximate 46% overhead at that time, I wrote off 2/3 of my profit to be part of that dental plan. So I decided, do I really need to accept this from the insurance company? They're beating up on me pretty hard. I looked at the worst case scenario and decided, can I survive a worst case scenario? And what I define as the worst case scenario is if I drop this given carrier and every single one of those patients are gone. So on average, 41% of my practice is based on this particular carrier. If I stop accepting them, 41% of my practice just goes away overnight. And can I survive that? And if I had that extra time, could I use it more productively to market my practice better? You could do lunches with RDs, spend some time staff training, just have more immediate availability for your insurance or your emergency patients from your better offices, and just have more family time even. For me, it was a function of availability. I had a GP office that I was heavily interested in working with that started to refer patients to me. And they told me in confidence one time that they were referring patients elsewhere because they couldn't get their patients in within 48 hours. I have a patient in pain and I can't see him for 3 weeks. And the reason for that is that I'm filled with insurance-based patients, and that's just absolutely unacceptable. I want to be booked out 2-3 days. So the first time you have an A referrer that can't get a patient in your office because you've got a C referring office's patient in your chair, it's time to consider switching it. This is how we're doing it. We're getting rid of them incrementally. I ranked the companies based on the sum write-off per the average molar. So it's not the fee for the molar in my office. I factor in the cost of the consult, radiology, and at this time, I'm not embarrassed to show my fees. This is the sum consult. We used to take 2 PAs, a bite wing. This is a fee for a cone beam, and there's the fee for a molar root canal. Our fees are changed. I don't take 2 PAs anymore because I'm taking more cone beams. But at that time, this was what I would collect for an average molar. And if you just look at the molar root canal fee across the board, you might say, well, this is only a $100 write-off, but if you actually sum everything together, when you're getting dinged pretty hard in your consult, when it settles down at the end, that's where you see per average case. So you have to look at all the fees that you would normally charge. The PPO number 8 and 9 there, those are our 2 worst. That was 50% of my patient volume at that time. These 2 we decided to just eliminate, and it was a very scary time. It was a pretty bold move to take half of my practice and say, nope, like, no longer insurable for you. This also, I think, was a nice thing at that time. And again, I'm not encouraging insurance participation, but for me, it was a luxury knowing that I was coming off them, that I had the ability to start doing things that I wouldn't ordinarily do if I was working with people that were that relationship might seem a little bit more volatile. And I started commandeering cases and restoring cases and doing things the way that I want, knowing that I didn't care how the restorative dentist felt about it. I was doing what's in the best interest of my patient, what I wanted to do, and I started doing things like this. And when I want to restore a case now, I don't send it back with these little flecks of amalgam. And I was able to actually test the waters on this subject, found out that referring dentists weren't as upset about it as I expected. And in fact, I found that most of my referring dentists actually appreciate the restorative in the way that they don't. So just to summarize, my insurance participation gave me some initial income security, but it was very expensive. And it gave me some time to really improve my skills before approaching the best dentists in town. I need to decide, yes, I want to be a fee-for-service practice. Build a reputation so that people that have fee-for-service patients will want to refer to you. Ranking the PPOs from the bad to the worst. And then once I had my availability started getting limited, I started to chop it from the worst up. All right. A little bit short on time. I'm very looking forward to hearing the other speakers, so I'll just make it an abrupt stop. So, Eric, thanks.
Okay. I think most of you know me. I'm Fred Tsutsui. The presentation I'm going to present today is going to be a little bit different. Rob gave a wonderful presentation on what it's like to start up today and how to set up a practice and the financials and everything that go with it. I'm going to give it from a different perspective. I'm going to be looking at my career from the beginning, which is 31 plus years ago, and tell you what I started out with, and hopefully maybe give some insight as far as giving some ideas on how to get to a point in time in the future that you'll be satisfied with your life, your profession, and all. So let's see. All right. So a little bit about myself, where I started from. Little did I know that my mentor Gary was graduating from dental school when I did in 1976. And then a little bit later, right behind me, graduating from endo. So my mentor was right with me, but I didn't even know he was there alongside me. But I graduated in 1976. I was in general dentistry for 3 years as an associate. And so I've got that perspective of being an associate in general dentistry and what it's like to be an associate. And then after endodontic residency, then I went into solo practice. And during my endodontic residency program, I think one of the things that helped me was I had 2 co-residents. And both co-residents had the experience of having their own private practice, solo practice themselves in general dentistry. And being an associate, coming from an associate background, I got a more business awareness approach to setting up a practice. And so that helped me. And unfortunately, both my co-residents had to terminate their practices early, one because of disability, which I'll talk about briefly, the concerns about disability, and then the other one just basically burnt himself out. And I think that's another thing you have to be aware of as far as how to avoid burnout. And then basically I was in solo practice for about 13 years. 9 years initially, and then I took on associates for 9 years. My experience with associateships were good and bad. One was that I had some great associates, but they didn't want to live in the community where I live, and so they had other ideas of where they wanted to live, and that's a perfectly valid reason, and an important reason, I should add. And then things just didn't work out philosophically and all that. Then the next 13 years, I've been since 1999, I've been in solo practice again by myself, and I've been very satisfied with the way things have gone. I've got control over the office, better control than when I had 2 or 3 associates prior to that. And now currently I'm sharing space with an orthodontist, which is my daughter, which has been a great experience. So anyway, that's sort of basically my history. Now, looking back at my career, things that I've felt, I think, that I would like the younger generation to think about basically is, well, I call it success, but really what it is satisfaction. How do you find satisfaction in what you've done, when you can look back at your career? And basically, what I think is a really important factor here is the maintenance of balance in life, because without balance, things get really chaotic. And I think family, you have personal well-being, and you have your professional well-being. And it's hard to balance everything, but it really is important, because if you don't, then as I said, things get really out of whack. If you spend more time on your profession and neglect your family, well, the obvious problems are going to occur where they're going to feel neglected, and not enough attention to the kids and all, and your wife, your spouse. And personal well-being, unfortunately, I see all too many practitioners, just letting themselves go. Being watchful of your diet, exercise, because without you, your professional life and your family life is going to be greatly affected. So, it's really important, your well-being, and then professionally, you have your staff, you have your patient and your referrals, all to have to, try to balance out as well. So anyway, it's just really important to be cognizant of this balancing act that you have to, you should be aware of. Now, the other thing is that you need to also be aware of your future, because, for me, I can tell you that I've been very satisfied. I've been looking back 31 years. It's been a very satisfying life for me, because I enjoy what I'm doing. Gary's invigorated in me by training with Gary and using the microscope and everything that followed it just created a new excitement for me. And I think anyway, you have to anyway have that that positiveness in your life. But as far as planning for the future, you have your education for your children that you have to be aware of, because that can come up real fast on you as your children grow up. Retirement, really important later on. It may not seem so important now, but when you become 60 years old, it really hits you in the face that what am I going to do? Am I going to have to practice longer than I really want to? Anyway, it's very important. Looking at things over the long haul versus looking at the quick and now, I think my experience over the long haul, everything lasts longer. Things that take time to grow last longer than things that all of a sudden pop up and just it's a flash. And so I think having that mental capability of looking things over the long haul and not just for the short and easy, I think you need to keep in mind. One thing that my wife, when I went over this lecture that I was going to present today, my wife mentioned is that you got to know your strengths and your weaknesses, because we all have strengths, and I certainly have all my weaknesses. And so things like planning for the future as far as retirement, who's more capable, who has more time to plan for that. I think if you have if you're married, in my case it was my wife. She took care of all the investments in our family, and I was able to put two daughters through college, one through dental school and all, and she had the funds all set aside for that, invested. And ready to go, and then retirement as well, and I think at this point looks like the future is going to look bright, that we're going to be able to retire and be comfortable. So strengths and weaknesses, I think, is one of the first things that you have to determine, and then try to delegate what you are going to be able to do and what you can't do so well, and find the now, one of the other things is surround yourself with level-headed people to help your weaknesses, because that is going to be important. Because if you can't, if you can't take care of the investments, if you can't take care of certain things in your practice, you have to be able to find people that are capable of helping you in your weaknesses. So. Anyway, and I think the other thing my wife also added was avoid overextending yourself. It's so easy, with all the costs of everything, as far as personally and professionally. You just got to, really, hunker down and just, try to conserve. I think. When I was thinking about factors that affect entering into practice, I think things like if you're married or single will have an effect either positively or negatively. If you're married, do you have dual income? Financial obligations, do you have loans or bad credit? Family obligations, divorce. My co-resident, had been divorced during the residency program, and he lost a good amount of money that he had saved up as a general dentist, and so he was out to really make a killing, so to speak. And I knew it because he just developed this speed in doing cases. And in my class, I did maybe 225 cases. He did 500 cases, and so I knew that he was going to go out there and really try to make up for that loss. And what happened was that he's the one that went on disability because he just burned himself out, and and so that experience taught me, it's better to just be just like the tortoise and the hare, just, take your time, do things right, and don't worry about the speed and all that as far as, being in practice. And I think over the long haul, if you just pace yourself, I think you'll be able to last longer doing endodontics and any other profession in life. And then the other thing is, if you're coming out of a residency program, I found this out just from my daughter, that it's hard to get credit, especially in financial downtime, right, like we're experiencing right now. That without a credit history, you can't get a loan. And so that's something that I think is a factor that will affect some of you who haven't, been through private practice or, previously, and just went from dental school to residency and then, coming directly out. Okay, so options that you have as far as practicing after residency, going through a residency program. You have solo practice, you have associateship, and associateship leading to practice to a partnership, and then you have long-term associateships. Now, I'll tell you what I think about associateships and going versus going solo. But I just wanted to go over some pros and cons with you, and that is as far as associateships leading to partnerships. Well, it could be a pro and con. An existing practice has personality that is a reflection of the owner. So anybody that's going to be associating into a practice is going to have to always have that factor, and it could be a positive, it could be a negative factor, depending upon the owner practitioner. Pros are if there's no immediate practice depth but immediate income, established referral base, you can learn from the experienced practitioner, and you have office coverage. The cons are having to deal with physical layout that's already existing, have to fit in and win the confidence of the existing staff as well as referrals. And then there's the buy-in. Now, what I call unspoken truths about the buy-in with the older practitioner is that there's concerns and considerations regarding the older owner of the practice, and one of them is his enthusiasm. I've seen situations where an associate went into this practice thinking that it was going to be a real great situation to be in, and then basically finding out that the owner his enthusiasm wasn't was on the downside. And so, and naturally the staff's enthusiasm is down, and and then there's the respect of the staff for the new associate. It could be problematic. And then the older owner may be taking off a lot, and so that could be a good or bad, because if the owner is taking off a lot, then there's more business, but then there's not that mentoring that is helpful to the new practitioner. And then I tell you, this is a situation I see all too often later in life. For some reason, more now than before, is that you have a recently divorced older practitioner basically having to start over again. And then that associate, in that situation, the associate takes on the overflow, but so that the referrals aren't lost. But yet, during hard economic times like we're experiencing right now, you may not care if the associate is really busy or not. So anyway, there's concerns there. I'm going to try to wrap this up here. I'm going to move on here to the final here so we don't cut off the time. So what is ideal? Well, the ideal is basically you want to, personal preferences are where you want to practice where you want to live, and then the type of practice that you want to be involved in. Do you want to go in solo, or do you want to go into a buy-in, into an associateship with buy-in to it? To me, most ideal is to start, and Gary's always said this to everyone, is to start to build your own practice. But maybe people don't have the confidence or the financial capability to do so. So the next ideal is to buy into a practice with a doctor who has kept up and looking to retire and willing to have an associate take over and really retire. The cost of the buy-in should be established before entering that practice. So I think one of the keys is to know what it's going to cost to buy into the practice or buy the practice out fully. And then the other factors, as far as in the ideal situation, is to ideal would be to take over a situation as a associate first, maybe for about 1 to 2 years. Then the older doctor leaves or becomes the associate to the new doctor for maybe whatever period of time, 1, 2, 3 years. And then at the discretion of the new doctor and an agreement with the older doctor. This allows for the learning period and the best means of trying to keep the referral base together. And then I guess personality, temperament of each individual is key to making the right decision. I guess basically that's it for me, and can answer any questions later on after the other speakers are finished.
Thanks. I'd also like to just start off by thanking my staff who have been with me between 22 and 27 years and owe a lot of my success to them. I've just got the fingers, but they are really the arms that guide me. They're better? Good enough? So, as I said, I was going to talk on another issue, and then I put out an email into the chat room, and I just wanted to show that I originally came from South Africa. I got a bunch of degrees in South Africa. When I arrived in the United States, I had to redo everything, and then I eventually got into practice, and I had mentorship along the way. And then, as I remember, my great friend and mentor, Sam Seltzer, said to me, every 7 years you'll get that itch to want to do something else. And I was very fortunate in that that I met Gary at I believe it was the first lecture on the microscope, which was held in Philadelphia. And I happened to be sitting behind him, or beside him, and we started talking about squash, which we both had a love for. And then we talked about the microscope, and he said, well, why don't you come out to San Diego, because I run a course there. And so I ended up being in the second perf course ever held. So my longevity with Gary goes back to then, and then from there we started off TDO after I got burnt in endo non-vision. And so I've been with Gary right from the beginning, and I owe a great debt of gratitude to him for keeping my interest. And at the age of 67, I'm as excited now as I was when I was a young kid starting off. And thank you for that, Gary. The only thing you never could accomplish is you could never beat me in squash. So I went into the chat room, and I asked for questions, and people wanted to know what's the reality of what's going on in practice. And then I also started seeing some emails coming where somebody wrote, my number one referrer just sent me this case which he butchered, and I needed to get him out of it. And at the end of the email it said, is this a sign of things to come? Then I saw another email that said, I've now started moonlighting. So what I'm going to tell you today is basically what is going on in South Florida, and the perception versus the reality. We all know if we look at this diagram, and I asked you who was the biggest, you'd say the one on the right, but in fact the reality is they're all the same size. It just depends where you look from them. So I'm going to talk about the change in busyness. I walked into practice. It was very easy in those days. I opened a a fee-for-service practice in the area. I never knew a single dentist. I never knew a single person. I spoke a different language. And I just started. And it was easy to start then. It's very different today. And I built this fee-for-service practice. I'm in a small town. There's only 12,000 people in my town and surrounded by today about 50,000 people. And we were only 2 endodontists, and I came with something different to offer, so it was pretty easy to do that. We also had one main employer, who was Pratt Whitney Aircraft, had 10,000 engineers. And about 80% of my practice were these terrific families. And then Pratt Whitney closed down, and we lost 10,000 people overnight. But at my busiest, I was never booked up more than a week ahead, which I feel is absolutely ideal. Because if I never had to work till 7 o'clock at night. Because if I got an emergency, I could call a patient who was not in pain and ask them if they wouldn't mind moving to the next day or 2 days later and get the emergencies in that way. So my time was always filled. I'm going to fast forward now to the reality we faced since 2007 when the economy changed. And so especially over the last 5 years, what's happened? The culture of referral has changed. The general dentists are doing a lot more, and we endodontists are partially responsible for that, or some of us are, by going out and giving these one-day you can be an endodontist courses. And I volunteered in the beginning to help at a number of these courses because I wanted to see what was being taught, how it was being taught. And I got a shock when I got to some of these courses in South Florida. I found some of my best referring dentists were there, learning how to do endo in one day. The second problem we have is that in the dental schools today, the endo in undergrad is taught by non-endodontists for the most part. So they never get that opinion about how to refer, what to look for, etc. And there's lack of diagnosis. Two of my best friends in Florida came from a lady that was sent to me 28 years ago for endo on number 15. And all she had was hypersensitive dentin. I told her that she didn't need anything. I prescribed something for that. And she called us up, asked us over for dinner, and we've been best friends for 28 years. And I've always practiced like that. And I'm sure you all face that. We get cases sent in for number 3, and it's number 30 that needs the treatment. So there's a problem there. Economics, I don't have to go too much into that because you know how down it is. And then implants. Implants have made a tremendous dent into our specialty. And when I go to a meeting and I walk in and the prime sponsor of the AAE is Nobel Biocare, who's an implant company, that doesn't say too much for our specialty. And now we've got the oversupply of endodontists. We graduate about 200 a year. We've got approximately 4,100 endodontists in the United States, and that's a big number to add to it. So every 5 years we get a 20% increase in the number of endodontists. And in former years, people of my age were already gone. Usually by 60, 62, they were no longer practicing. We live much older today, and if you're fortunate to have your good health, and as other speakers have said, take care of that health, because you only get one shot at it, we tend to want to go on. I just put in a cone beam at the age of 67. That means I'm not going anywhere for at least 5 years. And I still am excited to go to work. But my practice has definitely changed. So the numbers of down economically, the practice gross and net incomes have gone down anywhere from 10 to 50%. And restorative dentists obviously are looking out for themselves. The perception, if somebody wandered into the chat room and never knew about TDO, but they just came in and they were in our chat room for a few weeks, they would think that TDO enables or entitles us to have a fee-for-service practice, and that endodontic practice affords you a tremendous income, and that it's bulletproof. And those three things used to be, that was the perception, it used to be like that. And in certain parts of the country, like you can see where Rob is, you can still do that. And what I'm going to give you now is my personal findings and from talking to my other colleagues in South Florida. The reality is we now have in Florida coyote endodontists. These are the guys who have a little bag, and they will travel anywhere from Miami to Melbourne, which is about a 4 or 5 hour drive. And wherever the work is, they will go. The second group we now have the rentodontists. There's a company called DDS something. The general dentist will call up and say, I'd like to rent your guy on Monday afternoon. I have 3 cases. And the rentodontist goes there, he does the 3 cases. If there's an emergency, tough. If there's a post-operative problem, tough. The next week, he may call again to the rentodontic company. He gets a different endodontist. There's never any continuity. The third group are the in-house specialists. On Wednesday, just before I left my last consult, after I took the cone beam to decide whether to retreat a tooth or not and decided it would be better off to be extracted and have an implant, I called the general dentist and I said to him, the woman is in pain. Should I send her to, and he used to use an oral surgeon and a periodontist to do it. And he said, no, send her back to me. I now have a periodontist and oral surgeon who come to my office. And he said, I also should tell you that there's a retired general dentist from New Jersey who moved down here, and he's looking to work a few days a week, which said to me, you're next on the list, buddy. And his numbers have dropped from, he used to send me 40 cases a year. Last year I got 5. And I assume next year there will be 0. So those are the in-house specialists. And now we have the corporates. This is becoming a major, major problem, not only in endo, but in dentistry in general. In my little town, in the building right next door me, we have Gentle Dental. Gentle Dental has been next door me for 10 years. They have 8 endodontists, 6 periodontists, 4 orthodontists on staff in the building next door me. 5 miles away is another Gentle Dental. And they've now just bought another one 5 miles away from that. So from my office in a straight line, there are 3 Gentle Dentals. Just north of me, less of 1 mile, has now opened Great Expressions. Great Expressions, I've just had to treat a patient who was treated there by a periodontist who drives from Miami. In traffic, that can be 3 or 4 hours. And he comes up once or twice a week. Corporates are making an inroad, and if you see, because there's venture capital out there and they've realized that dentistry is a profitable business. The problem is we dentists, for the most part, are technicians. And we had a lucrative profession, but if we'd known anything about business, it could have been even more lucrative at the same time as being artistic. Well, these people have come along and they know how to run the business. They have corporate buying power, they have corporate marketing power, etc., etc. And so the direction that seems to be going is that the corporates are going to take over, and they're going to have the technicians who are us working for them. And I'm sure you all saw that one email that was in the chat room where Heartland Dental is on the market now for $1.4 billion. That's a lot of money. We can't compete with that. It's impossible. I just saw now there's some new implant companies taking over. They take a full-page ad in the paper and they're opening up nationally. At our own AAE meeting, it sickened me to see 3 corporates in the exhibition hall. I grew up in the time of no advertising, and that changed in 1987. And my mind still believes like that we shouldn't be advertising. But you're going to have to do it. And that's one of the reasons I'm here, and I can't wait to see that presentation tomorrow. But you're going to have to be proactive because we are being engulfed by these corporate entities. I spoke to a colleague of mine in South Florida. I just add that 3 practitioners in my age group between 60 and 70 had to close their doors. They just had no more work. They are now working in general dentists' offices. But this was a very interesting situation, and I'll close after this. A young endodontist dropped off his resume at his office and then left. So he looked at it, it looked quite nice. He called him up and he said, come in and see me. So he says, what are you doing? He says, I'm working for Dr. A. And straight away, my friend turns cold. Dr. A has been his number one referrer for 32 years. He says, do you work anywhere else? He says, yeah, I work for Dr. B. This guy also sends him a lot of work. And he says, what about your classmates who just graduated? And he's finding that they are in all these practices that have always sent him all their work. So he sat him down and he said to him, you know, you guys are coming out, you're also part of creating this problem. Because you go to work for, he said, I used to have a terrific practice, fee-for-service practice, that I could have sold you. But you've now taken X% of my practice because you're working there, and your friends have taken, and now I no longer have a practice that I can sell you. So if my practice disappears and you can't afford to go into practice on your own, you're basically stuck with that model for the rest of your life. And I stopped to think about it, and that's true. The problem is when they come out of debt was mentioned by Rob Corr. On my way down here, the latest figure put out, and I just read the AGD magazine, the average dental student now, the debt is $342,000. Yeah. If you go to graduate school, you're looking at over $500,000. As Rob said, you've got to open a practice, you'd need another $500,000. And it's tough to get money nowadays. So our models are going to have to change, and unfortunately, I think they're changing for the worst. And I always say to you, whatever happens in Florida does not stay in Florida, and I come from the hanging Chad County, and we probably will have the same sort of thing in this next election. I won't go through all this, but you know why people don't have money. The problem with, and I can tell you now honestly, I always had a fee-for-service practice. I got a phone call from my number one referrer who said, I've started taking Delta Dental. Could you please take Delta Dental? What am I going to say to him? No? If I say to him no, that part of my practice is gone. So I said yes. Then I just started seeing all these whole gaps in my book. So you take another few. There's a lot of problems with taking insurance. One is the low fees. The second is that you could need additional employees, and you need, if you're taking one, you need to take them all, because when the office staff at a completely insurance-driven practice, and they say send to an endodontist, she's not going to call my office and find out whether I take that insurance or not. She knows that Dr. C around the corner from me takes all the insurances. So, and then the other problem you've got is a lot of your fee-for-service patients have this insurance. Now you have to start charging them insurance rates instead of fee-for-service rates. So there are a whole lot of things that are wrong with insurance. And you hope that you'll have a viable practice when it comes to selling it. The reality is that you may not. These are just some of the transitions. I'll leave that. Greg Stanley said in 1982, rather retire in practice than from practice. And he said, you dentists have got it great. You want to work 3 days a week and play golf 4 days a week? Work 3 days a week. You can basically be retired while still practicing, and I've lived by that. And this was a saying that my late father gave me when I was young: live for today and think for tomorrow. And I think Fred told you that about enjoy yourself, don't overextend yourself, and think for the future. I know the girls in my office, when I started doing a pension plan for them, they rather would have had the money then. Now that they're older, they realize how important that pension plan is. And I'd like to just dedicate this. These are some of my mentors who had a tremendous influence on my professional life. And especially, I mentioned Gary, and the other one was Sam Seltzer, who gave me a shot to get out of South Africa, start my life again. And in addition to this, I want to thank all the people in the United States who helped give me this shot and a new lease on life. Thank you very much.
Okay, so take a look at this slide. You know that human beings tend to focus on the present, but looking at one point in time, it's really not possible to tell if the sun is really rising or if the sun is setting. It's strictly a matter of perception. We've been talking about perception this morning. This is perceptual limitations on perception. If you take a look at those two lines, each of us has shown you this. You've seen it many times. But those two lines are actually the same size. Now, we also have cognitive issues with perception. Some of you may have seen this before, but depend upon who's perceiving this. Some of you may say, I like that black bag that she has. Others may say, where did she get that blouse? Some of us, older gentlemen, may say, it's unusual she's wearing a thong, okay? And some of women here may say she's dressed awfully slutty. But how many of you see that the dog is driving the car? Good, okay. Okay, so as part of my presentation, I did a survey of perceptions. I put this out on TDO. I did a survey. I'm going to share the results of the survey. It's basically perceptions of a very small focus group. Only 61 of you replied. And I'm going to parallel this focus group as I go along the way with my perspective and also some real numbers. Okay, so the first question is, I have been in practice for how many years? Okay, most of you, 0.5 years. I have to take my glasses off to read this. And so the majority of people who actually responded have been in about 5 years. So this is the beginning of our focus group. My practice location is in AAE district, and as you can see, District 5 and District 6 is predominates in this focus group. Do you all know District 5 and District 6 are those people in Arizona, Texas, Alabama, that particular area? All right, now it's important, as Rob said and as Russ said, that practice norms vary with location, and as Tip O'Neill would say, all politics is local. The number of endodontists in my practice, as most of you said, solo. Just the purple ones are 3 or more. My current practice would best be described as fee-for-service, mostly fee-for-service and insurance and some fee-for-service. The blue is fee-for-service and some insurance. And the green is other, which includes PG and full-time educator. Now, the question that I ask, is the future bright? In general, the future of endodontics is not bright, according to almost 70% of the respondents, if we take the neutral portion away. But on the other hand, most people do have a 5-year vision and a strategic plan in place, so I see that as a good thing. I see that as a good thing. Almost 80% will be practice and educationally debt-free within 10 years. I see that as a great thing. If you're all planning, you've got your plan, and you're going to be out of debt within 10 years, I think that's smart. You're planning ahead, as Russ and Fred mentioned. Would you do it again if you had it all to do over again? And yes, 90% of you, almost 90% said yes, I would become an endodontist. So I like that too. I think that's a positive. Let's talk a little bit about practice models. What do you think is the most common practice model 5 years from now? And what's interesting about this slide, and I'm just basically re-emphasizing what Russ stated, is that the one in green is corporate dentistry. In 5 years from now, it will be the #2 type of practice model according to your focus group. Okay? If you take a look at the pie on the bottom, which we've shown you before, there's not a single one of you is in corporate dentistry right now. Yet you're all feeling that it's going to be the #2 type of practice model. That is something to be concerned about and to monitor. I got this in the mail, okay? Corporation-owned dental practices are undergoing a huge growth spurt fostered by private equity firms and investment bankers. And yes, they're billion-dollar chains, and they're not going away. They're just getting bigger and bigger. Practice and financial stability. Okay, my practice situation and financial stability will improve, okay, over the next 10 years. More than 70% feel that their financial and practice stability will improve. So we've got a positive outlook, okay? Will the number of procedures increase? Nearly 60% feel that endodontic procedures will decrease. Almost 40% feel otherwise if we take the neutral away. So 60% say there are going to be fewer root canals. Perceptions. 88% feel that root canals done by specialists will decrease, though. Now, let me give you some unofficial and official figures here. So on the ADA figures in 2000, there were about 25 million root canals done in the United States. In 2009, there were 16 million done. In 2012, which I just took off the AAE website about 3 days ago, 15 million root canals were done. From unofficial figures, it's probably closer to 12 million that are now being done in the United States. So none of these are made up. They are unofficial. The data is very hard to get. But this is more of a reality check because these are actual numbers that have been published. The percentage of endodontic procedures performed in the future by the GP, and I wrote, will decrease. And everybody, this was sort of a trick question, just to make sure people were awake. And everybody agreed that they're actually going to increase. So you've got less than 15 million root canals done every year. Excuse me, the AAE says more than 15 million. Endodontists perform 25 per week. This is verbatim from the banner on their website. GPs perform fewer than 2 root canals per week. How many people in this room believe that GPs perform fewer than 2 root canals per week? Raise your hand. Thank you. 4,100 endodontists, 25 per week, 52 weeks, gives you about 36% of all the root canals done in the United States, or 5.3 million, okay? Now, also, the AAE would like you to know that 45% of the people who have heard of a root canal specialist, but nearly half of the people surveyed would prefer root canal to extraction. What they didn't tell you is how many would prefer seeing a specialist as opposed to a general dentist. But I do have some information on that. But let me continue on the size of the pie. The unofficial figures, if you go with the 12 million, 4,100 endodontists, 1.8 million per year, that's a 34% difference in the numbers that you've been given. And the average endodontist performs 8.4 root canals per week. Now, I don't know, that seems a little bit on the low side, but probably the number is somewhere in between those two. One thing we can be sure of, it is not getting larger. The pie is definitely getting smaller. Now, as the pie gets smaller, these are little Covey diagrams. The pink circle of influence, the larger that pink circle of influence, the more proactive your focus can be. As that pie gets smaller and your circle of influence decreases, and your circle of concern or circle of interest, which is the yellow one, increases, you become reactive. You are essentially powerless to do anything about what's in the yellow circle. This is what I think is happening. This is why I think this problem is not being fully remediated. So if you're in the yellow circle right now, you might as well say the Serenity Prayer and move on. There's not much you can do. Workforce demographics. Russ put up the slide, same information. About 200 new endodontists per year. 4,100 are presently in clinical practice. Very few of us change from active to retirement status. And a few years ago, the AAE came out with some numbers. 12 endodontists changed to retirement status per year. So you're getting about 200 more, that's, as Russ says, about 1,000 more in a 5-year period with minimal retirement. On the other hand, the baby boomers, if you look at the yellow, the baby boomers are getting ready to retire. And when they do, that will be a large chunk. That will be a large chunk, and that will prove to your advantage if you're in Gen Y, because Gen Y is essentially taking over the workforce, probably by around 2015, 2016. And I think you're going to wind up seeing more and more of us baby boomer endodontists retiring. Now, if it turns out that we don't have a practice to sell, then we're all in trouble, okay? But I think that will be actually a positive thing. Now, that's not the end of the workforce, though. We have mid-level providers, people who are being allowed to do, trained and allowed to do endodontic procedures. And foreign dental schools are now receiving accreditation from the American Dental Association. You have Boston University School of Dental Medicine, Dubai campus. You have University of Michigan has a foreign campus. These people are getting diplomas from these universities. It will say Michigan campus or Dubai campus. And they are fully eligible to take the licensing boards in the United States. The only thing that they need to practice is passing the board and having a green card. We have 12 new dental schools now, and I think I was told, Fred, there were 20 on the board. These are for-profit dental schools. There's going to be a huge increase in manpower, not necessarily endodontic manpower, but manpower, and it's on its way. It's on its way. Russ mentioned implants posing a threat, that if a significant portion of the practice involves retreatment and surgery, it will, okay? And as we see here, a lot of you agree that it will replace retreatment and surgery as a treatment of choice. So if half your practice is retreatment, you might want to start thinking about taking implant courses. Long-term results of implants, if it ever turns out that the insurance companies analyze these and they find that they are, their outcomes are better than root canals, and they decide that they're going to reimburse for implants and not root canals, then the endodontic portion of the insurance portion that reimburses endodontists is going to fall drastically. It will fall drastically because the implant is a much more time productive procedure for the general dentist to do. The endodontic market has dropped in growth. You can ask all the dental suppliers, they'll say it went down a little bit, but they don't really want to tell you how much. But they do know that the implant growth has been staggeringly high. At least until 2008, 2009, they were growing at the rate of about 20 to 25% per year. So back to the survey, the keys to future practice success. What are the key items? And let's put these in order. So in order, number one, believe it or not, according to the focus group, was turnaround time. That's the key factor in practice success. Number two was educating the general dentist and the patient about the benefits of specialty care. And then comes affordability. Outcome enhancement is fourth, and relationship marketing is fifth. Educating the patient. Okay, let's talk about that because that was number two, I think, on the list. Well, the AAE spent to date more than $2.5 million on their public awareness campaign. And they came up with the statement that they managed to say that 45% of those surveyed heard of root canal specialists. Nearly half of the people surveyed would prefer root canal to extraction. What they didn't tell you was that the oral surgeons and the orthodontists also spent money, totaling hundreds of millions of dollars between those other two groups. And all three of the groups came up with the exact same conclusion. The conclusion is patients prefer their general dentist to the specialist due to the trust factor, despite the additional training that a specialist has. This is the truth. You can do all the public awareness, all the education that you want to do, but it all boils down to the patient trust factor with the GP. Turnaround time. Now these are fast turnaround times. These are $5 haircuts, happen very quickly. Okay? But when it comes to results, when it comes to outcome, okay, you can't really put a price on results, especially those that publicly affect your image or your reputation. On the other hand, we may find ourselves fixing not only the $5 haircut, but the $500 haircut. Okay? So I want to just briefly share, I know it's getting on in time. Just I want to briefly share a little bit of a parallel with the medical model. As I've been watching over the past 25 years, I'm on the executive committee of my hospital, which happens to be across the street from my office. So what's happened in medicine is this used to be something called the indemnity plan. It's no longer available. You can't even find one if you want one nowadays. It's been destroyed. There is no indemnity insurance. They have also reduced or eliminated brokers' commissions, and then they have created a generation of co-payers. Every patient, probably most of the people in this room, are co-payers. They come in, they have insurance, they expect their co-pay. Why, in a dental setting, why wouldn't they expect the same thing? All right, so in medicine, that's what's happened. Now, what's happening lately is hospitals have begun to align themselves with medical practices. If they say to a cardiology practice, come in with us, why don't you come into the hospital because you can get higher reimbursement for EKGs and echoes if we work together. So bring your patients in, we'll give you an office, we'll bill for you, we'll do everything else. And then they call that alignment. And then whatever profits come through, they call it something called gain sharing. And then there's a contract that lasts about three years or so. And then at the end of the 3 years, they have the opportunity to say, well, you know, things have been great. We really like you. We've saved a lot of money. We've made a lot of money together. I think we want to cut your reimbursement down by about 50%. And then if the doctor says, well, I don't really want to do that, then they say, well, you're free to go. We've already got all your patients, so we don't need you anymore. So that's starting to happen. The first phase of that is going through. The physician alignment and the doctors are now moving in. So the doctors have become essentially salaried employees of the hospital. The hospital systems are now becoming bigger and bigger, and they merge, and they now say, okay, now there's only two people in the picture. It used to be the doctor, the hospital, and the insurance company. Now it's just the insurance company and the hospital. Okay? With that, what has emerged from this pendulum swinging off in the other direction is something called concierge medicine. Some of you may have seen it in areas that you live. In areas such as Boca Raton, Florida, where it began, you cannot find a physician, an internist, unless you find one that participates as a concierge. You've got to pay them anywhere from, I think it's $1,200 to $3,000 a year for the privilege of having access to their personal phone and cell phone numbers. In Aspen, Colorado, the cost for a concierge physician is $14,000 a year. You don't need very many patients who pay you $14,000 a year to get your practice going. And they have no problem getting this money. So I find it interesting that in all these bad times, there's always something that comes out with a new type of model. Trickle-down trends, what to expect from Obamacare. Well, you know that employers are going to have to insure all employees. They may decide they're going to have a cost-cutting incentive. They may say, let's just cut the dental benefits. We can't afford it. If that happens, the insurance company, if they can retain the patient, fine. If they can't, they're going to start cutting benefits to their providers. In fact, they're already doing it. They've done it in New Jersey. They're doing it in Washington State. If that continues, you're going to wind up having patients who don't have insurance. They don't seek dental care. They can't afford the dental care when they seek it, and then they're going to look for cheap dental care and enter Aspen Dental and the corporates and things like that. This could be a whole falling dominoes effect. There's a wonderful documentary, if anybody wants to see it, you can get it on the web. It came through PBS. It's called Dollars and Dentists. It talks exactly about this. It talks a lot about the care credit problems and also about the size and the magnitude of this problem. Anyway, the future is your perception. These are just perceptions that I have and basically just one small focus group of 61 people. You can decide if the sun is rising or setting, and some of you may say every cloud has a silver lining. On the other hand, you may say around every silver lining there's a cloud. It's really up to you and your attitude. One little piece of advice, this is a wonderful diagram, and I do want to dwell a little bit on it. there's sort of a Venn diagram that says what we do well on the top, what we want to do, and what we can be paid to do. If you can find that intersection in the middle, it says hooray, okay? But if you want to do something and you don't do it well, okay, and you do it well and you can't be paid for it, you have to be paid for it. If you can do something well and you can be paid for it, but you don't want to do it, then don't do it. If you can be paid to do something and you want to do it, but you don't do it well, then you have to do it well. And that's it. Thank you for your attention.